and you adventure out to explore and you adventure out to entertain yourself by using your imagination. And it is not compliance, it is not conformity, it is creativity. Growth happens in
What if you turn hardship into greatness, anger into serenity? Everything changes. Make your life a masterpiece. Have you ever wondered what teaching ought to do? Why teaching can make a difference? And how great teaching actually looks like? This and so much more now. Welcome, I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Casey Jakubowski. Casey Jakubowski has a PhD in education and is a consultant and also a former classroom teacher who really thinks deeply about teaching, learning, and really more broadly about the purpose of education. And now I'm so thrilled to have him on the show on how to think about teaching and really about his book because he published several books thinking about teaching. Welcome, Casey Jakubowski, to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you and really to engage in a discussion about teaching and also really about your personal love of and for teaching.
Thank you so much. It's an honor and a privilege.
Let's start. Introduce yourself in one powerful sentence. Let's assume that you have only one single sentence. What would this sentence look like?
Good challenge. So, my sentence would be I'm Dr. Casey Jakubowski, and over my career and in my life, I have been thinking about teaching as a way to ensure the future is bright.
Beautiful. And just to frame really the discussion, let's define education and then we really go specifically into teaching and how it relates to education. So, what is education and then what is teaching according to you?
That is an excellent differentiation because education is learning new knowledge, skills, and ability no matter where you are and what you're doing. Teaching and formal learning happens in schools. And one area that I have learned over my career, and I talk about in my book, Thinking About Teaching, and my other book, Getting to the Hearts of Teaching, is learning happens anywhere, everywhere, anywhere. But if you are trying to teach, you are really ascribing a way to create opportunities for people to learn in a setting where your goals and their goals are often informal structures put aside. Because what happens is that in formal education settings, people have goals, people have desired progress, but it's not often aligned with what the individual or the person with knowledge wants to accomplish. And I think we've lost that differentiation as we have, for instance, in France, the Minister of Education says, I know exactly what page of the textbook every single one of my students is on every day. Whereas in the United States, We can't even tell you if we have a textbook because many of our school systems are so underfunded they can't afford it. So I think that as we are seeing in a lot of countries, parents who want their children to be successful are going outside of schools, formal schooling, and having those children experience because they're learning through their experiences. Whereas other families who are not as fortunate are trying really hard just to make sure that their child is prepared for their adulthood.
Beautiful. So, what you are really describing is that teaching is really a vessel for learning and really positive human development. So, according to you, how should great teaching look like in a classroom and really embodied from a teacher? So, what are some of the future features that a good teacher ought to have in order to really enhance the learning of all the students? And then after you answer this question, I we backtrack a little bit and we look into a little bit your background, where you are coming from, and really what brought you into this beautiful, probably the most beautiful profession in the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's essential to think about the idea of what is learning and what is the joy. And I think teachers who inspire their students often have those students do hard things very creatively. And the way that I think about this is an inspirational teacher, such as an art teacher or a music teacher, or even a history teacher or a math teacher, who helps their students do difficult projects. But the students look at it and they go, wow, that was hard work, but I learned a lot. And boy, I feel proud of myself. That to me is so inspiring because if you are always successfully doing projects easily, you're not being challenged, you're not growing. Growth happens in challenge. And believe it or not, I learned that because specifically I had the opportunity to learn challenges as a young person. And that's why I am inspired to be an educator. Because as an educator, I want others to be challenged and I want them to be inspired to do difficult things.
What you're really describing, I think it's so crucial because it's really the proximal development of learning, right? To really find the sweet spot for each and every student in order to empower themselves to really learn and go deeper and deeper and never ever give up. And this is a true art to really find this sweet spot. Now, let's go back a little bit. You mentioned that you also went through hardship in your youth. So please give us a taste on how your youth looked like and what really were some of the crucial points in your life that ultimately inspired you to become a teacher.
Yeah, it's funny. My book, A Cog in the Machine, actually describes to me and people my career. And so, uh, yeah, so as somebody who's been through a lot through my book, A Cog in the Machine, I think it's important that we learn that as we are inspired through hardships, we learn unique practices and we learn unique opportunities to fail. And then as we fail, we grow. Okay.
So you were just alluding to really how hardship, how challenges really helped you grow and learn. please describe a little bit some of the challenges that you went through and how you found also the strength to actually look at the hardship and see it as a personal source of growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. As a younger person, I found school to be, quite frankly, boring. There were outside of school activities that often kept me engaged, such as scouting. I earned the Eagle Scout, which is the equivalent of the top chief scout in the United Kingdom. I'm not sure what some of the other European or international top ranks are, but we were challenged to fail fast, learn from those failures, and grow. And when you are 16 years old trying to put together a major camp out for 300 people, you're bound to learn. And by being bound to learn, what you often find.
Okay, so what how did this ultimately translate to your love of teaching and really learning? You said that you learned a lot in being a scout, of really learning from failing, but then also there is a huge gap, of course, of learning and translating this from an opportunity into a passion for really teaching. What was it that ultimately really initiated you of becoming a teacher and ultimately consultant?
Yeah, so in the book A Cog in the Machine that I wrote, I talk about how in my first teaching experience, I was a rural social studies teacher. And in that experience, I noticed that we were under resourced, that there had been significant turnover in teachers. And I was teaching so many different courses. I was teaching seventh graders, ninth graders, 11th graders, 12th graders by myself, fresh out of school. And the students didn't care about the content. They didn't care about the names, the dates, the locations. They cared about what was aware in their life, and they cared about what was going on in their world. And so I had been very good at school. I was good at doing the worksheets. I was good at memorizing the knowledge. But one of the things that I realized after I went to college to be a social studies teacher and a historian is the two didn't meet. Historians were very concerned about evaluating sources, they were evaluating arguments. Teachers were trying to respond to high stakes end of course exams. And because of that, when I went for my graduate degree, what I realized was if it's boring, if it doesn't matter, and if it doesn't connect with the individual, we are going to have a generation of students who become a generation of adults who say, this doesn't matter, this isn't valuable, this isn't important. And as somebody who was a summer camp staffer, where I was instructing campers why the environment mattered, why their actions impacted the world around them on a day to day basis, I saw huge disconnects between what we were expecting students to do in school and what campers were doing out in their camping environment. And then in my career, I left the classroom, not because of the students, but because of the fellow adults. I was bullied. I was bullied by my fellow educators, and I wasn't supported by my administrators. And so, even though I came in as a very bright person, people didn't want me. And people continue to not want me in educational systems. I have a doctorate, I've written multiple books, and yet I am not even interviewed for positions. Why? Because in our current educational structure in the United States, we say we want the best. We want to have these lofty goals. But in reality, what we are seeing are people who want sycophants or people who will say yes to them and make their lives easier. The best and the brightest are not becoming school district superintendents or principals. They're people who are encouraged because of friendship networks, which is wonderful. But I thought there was something called opportunity. And so, what I am seeing is, especially in education here in the United States, a system that is intentionally driving the best and the brightest out for the most compliant. And people may say, "Oh no, you're a doomsayer, you're a naysayer, you have such a negative outlook." But one of the points that I saw in my career where I was tasked with helping schools who were some of the poorest performers in the world, and I saw schools that were some of the best performing schools in the world, is it wasn't how hard the teachers were working. The majority of the teachers were working very hard. And it wasn't the students, because the students were really good. They were complying. What I saw was a pure apathy to this idea of moving you from okay to outstanding. Or when experts have such imposter syndrome that they let others critique take away from their ability to be the people they need to be. And so I became a consultant and I started CTJ Solutions specifically because of the wasted talent I see. People are amazing, people are phenomenal, people have drive. What they often don't have is somebody going, you know what? You're in the wrong place. You need to be in a different job. And we are seeing that right now. We are seeing that in the States. And I feel that this is why the more you know, it matters. Because the more you know about how to take a little bit of history, a little bit of science, a little bit of technology, a little bit of the humanities, and put them together to ask big, powerful, mind exploding questions, we will have a better society. When was the last time somebody asked you about your favorite dinosaur? When was the last time you experienced the joy of learning about baking soda and vinegar mixed together? That is what we need. That makes the world a better place.
What do you think is the reason why the most brilliant people get somehow, as you said, pushed out of the system, particularly in the US? You alluded to some extent, but dive a little bit more deeply into the issue.
Yeah, the great question is, where did this start? And I think standing on the shoulders of giants, as I have read books, the anti-intellectual history of America, or in praise of difficult people, or range, or the death of expertise, what you see is a common pattern of selfishness versus what other authors about leadership and leadership practitioners really know. A good leader promotes others. A phenomenal leader not only promotes others, but allows individuals to become their best selves. But that's hard work. That is difficult work. And it has to do with how relationships are constructed in formal schooling versus in education. In formal schooling, you have a board of education in the United States that is elected by people, and they want to serve as elected volunteer leaders, which means they don't want people complaining. They don't want people challenging. They don't want people causing difficulty. And then they hire a superintendent who is responsible for the day to day operations. They too do not want people complaining. They want people to do their jobs. And then there's a principal who, in many instances, they're told in college theory courses where they earn their license that you're an instructional leader. You are to inspire and move your staff. Within reality, though, most principals are middle managers who deal with problems with kids, problems with adults, problems with parents. And for a lot of them in the United States, it has become a challenge around sports. And well, I don't want to deal with that. I'm challenging that book, or I don't want my child exposed to that. But what that does is it creates an individualism that that gives preference and priority to the I as opposed to the we. And I think it's really interesting that if you look at the comparison of education in the United States versus, say, Europe, I have not seen many countries in Europe cut humanities and liberal arts and social sciences or close colleges the way the United States is going through that right now. Partially because, to my limited knowledge, and I would love to learn more. So if there's a university over there that'd like to bring me on, I'd love to come over and visit for a while. You see the idea of, if you're okay and your neighbor is okay and their neighbor is okay, we're all okay. Here in the United States, it's I'm okay, my family's okay, and to hell with the rest of them. That's very, very, very scary. It's extremely scary when the entire education system in a country is built upon how can I get through my job with the least amount of conflict. And how do I get through my job without annoying others or them annoying me? When in reality, we've lost sight of the purpose of education, which is how do we ensure that everybody is given the opportunity to work at their top talent in their top opportunity? We don't see that anymore. Silly question here. Why does the United States have 70% of its university instructors currently at adjunct or non permanent positions? The answer, we have made education a check off, and it is a business too. And I know everybody says that. I know people will say, but in my country, that's happening too. But the difference is if you are a precarious employee, you cannot work at the top of your intellect because you're always worried about, am I going to have a job? Am I going to survive? Can I provide? And I think that this business of making sure I have an easy job as a manager, I refuse to call them leaders, they're managers, has created a sense that I don't want the best and the brightest. They're too hard to work with. I want compliance. I want somebody who is going to take what I direct them to do and do it without question because that's easier for me.
Of course, in the short term, it's definitely easier, but in the long term, you will face tremendous challenges that we already see. And I think that's generally speaking throughout the Western world that we lost this ability to engage deeply with different ideas, with different points of views, and that we cannot allow the minority basically become, or really the tyranny of a minority, that we have to follow somehow a certain way of thinking, but we have to realize that we all have different ways of thinking because we are informed by different values, and therefore, as a result, you always have to some extent conflicts, right? And at the same time, the idea of education really tries to somehow prevent or almost deny that there are different conflicts. And I think education in and of itself is really the most democratic way of being a citizen and really living a purposeful life. So what
Mhm.
do you think is the biggest problem when we have this idea of education, which is a very noble idea of education, and I think therefore we can never ever really achieve it fully, as well as when it comes to democracy, right? Because it's always an idea that it's basically our North Star, right? That guides us in our decisions, and therefore we have political processes, we have policies in order to really manage conflicts as fruitfully and peacefully as possible, because that's simply the way to go. So what is the most important thing that needs to change on a personal level and in terms of teaching as a whole?
Mhm.
Because as a teacher especially, you are bombarded with all these politics within the school, and that's by and large, I would say, the reason why so many teachers also quit the profession. So, what do you think are some of the most important levers that we can use in order to make teaching and really education as a whole better?
I love that question because it really starts with the how we define conflict. So when anyone says conflict, immediately what pops into mind is uncomfortable and difficult and disagreement. And yet, anyone will tell you you make steel stronger by heating it, hitting it, and forging it. A diamond is a lump of organic matter that has been pressed and squeezed for millennia to create a diamond. Water comes out after filtration, where it is put through obstacles, pure. Thunderstorms are the rubbing of the environments together to create ozone and to clean. Instead, and this is something I talk about when I am asked to consult on conflict management, is we need to reframe it from you versus me to what are we saying that we're in agreement about? But what value added is your perspective bringing to me that I am reacting so negatively about? Because there are levels of conflict. And what we are seeing, especially in viewing between different peoples, is values level conflict, which is the deepest conflict. The data conflict, or the surface level. It's very easy to say the sky is blue. No, 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 no. It's cloudy. Or I think that there are 10 million data points. Well, I think there's 10.5 million. That is an easy conflict. But values conflict, that's the most difficult. And we see it in Europe. We see the idea that there is a concept of how to deal with folks fleeing terrible living conditions and what to do with those people. You know, we are seeing that here in the United States as well, because the values have become readily apparent as opposed to disguised. There is no idealized time period. There's always been us versus them. But the difference is now we are seeing a lot more loud. If you're not an us, you're a them, and you aren't human. Education is designed to create unification, collaboration. But if we are saying the thems are worth way less than the us's, that's not conflict. That is abhorrency. And it's happened before. When we say we are not telling history that is difficult to discuss because we do not want to make children uncomfortable. Is it that, or is it you don't know as a parent how to have mature conversations, right? And we must, as a world society talk about we do a lot right, but we are not doing a lot correct. And that is what I see. The biggest issue is that people want ease. They do not want to be challenged. They do not want discomfort. They're talking about creating the vibe or the existence, which is calm, cool, and collected. I would love to live a life where I can ignore, but I can't. And I know many teachers are leaving because they emotionally, with a conscience, cannot continue this example day in and day out, where they were taught and believe in a higher ideal, but the day to day patterns and rhythms are nowhere near. And as we are humans and we have this privilege of calling out what we see, we must remember that the structures and the society and the systems have created it so that a deep 80% or more of our fellow humans are trying to survive hand to mouth. And that is why when we ask teachers to be miracle workers, which in America, I don't know how many of your listeners actually realize this, but the United States' teaching burden is such that we are in the top 5 countries in the world with teacher to child contact time. Whereas many European countries, such as Germany, and G20 countries, such as Japan, are at the bottom of teacher student contact time. I think it's important for us to understand that if a teacher is asked to be an adult in the room, even if there are other adults with them, for 7 hours out of 8 or 9 a day, that is not education. That is child sitting, and it is chaos containment. And yet, if you look at firefighters, military, nursing, emergency people, folks who are involved day in and day out with the emergency crisis, there is a strong conversation around their mental health is breaking. 2 years ago, I was a school district administrator in a small rural K-12, pre-K through 12 district of just about 400 children. I had teachers who I needed to step into their rooms because they were at the tipping breaking point. And it wasn't that anybody was at fault. It was the fact that the needs of the children were so elevated for even small classes of 15, 16, 17, it was too much. I saw adult teachers sacrificing their own family's time and health in order to make sure their students had what they needed. Why? Because the system, even if it didn't directly say this to them, because almost all of them were young females who had young children at home. Other people's children are more important than yours. Hey! Oh my goodness. Go back to COVID 19. How many Europeans were forced to go into work day in and day out versus in the United States, where we actually had states that said to educators, I'm sorry that you may have a health condition. You need to be in school. You need to be taking care of those 20 or 30 little angels. And it doesn't matter if you're going to get sick and die. It doesn't matter if a family member of yours is going to get sick and die. That's your job to society. I was fortunate and I was blessed I could work remotely. I was very blessed. But we had in America over 1 million people die from COVID 19 because the decision was made that they were sacrificial. So if you look at our structure and our reality, the needs of the many do not outweigh the needs of the few or the one. My need outweighs the many's needs. And we are seeing that as it happens day in and day out. And it is causing stress to no end, especially in education. Nurses, they're doing a good job. They're getting their structures to the point where it's not perfect, but it's better than it was. But not in education. In fact, there are reports coming out all over the place in education. Oh my goodness, we're overstaffed. We're overstaffed. Population is going down. Enrollment's going down. But we're overstaffed. There's too many adults. Because in the United States, it's a business. It's not a service. It's a business.
So let's dive a little bit into the needs of the children needs, and I want to know from you how they changed and also why they changed so much, why it became so much more demanding, especially for teachers. Partly you could make the argument because of COVID, because also a lot of policy that were actually implemented had potentially, and we still can't really quantify the negative effects that it had on children, right? When they don't have this direct contact with each other anymore. So, what would you say that has changed over the past, let's say, 10 years in terms of the needs of children and the demands it puts on, especially teachers?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I speak as somebody without my own children, but with nieces and nephews and friends who have children. What we have seen, especially in Western society, is this idea of entertainment and engagement nonstop versus the ability to be bored and to find your way into imagination and play. I love growing up in the 80s. I loved not having this stupid device because, and I find it now in amongst myself, it's an attentive, addictive device. I loved, though, that as a young person, I was outside. or I could read at the library. I loved my local library. I loved the books. And thank God my parents supported that literacy habit, right? But there was imagination, there was adventure. We could do dangerous things safely when I was a child. Nowadays, that's not happening. What we're seeing is parents are being told that you need to have your child engaged nonstop, entertained nonstop, and you need to use electronic devices to do that. Whereas the research says very emphatically that it destroys children's brain growth correctly. We are seeing so many children who cannot be bored. They must have technology to entertain them. They must have flickering and flashing lights and sounds, and they must interact constantly to get the dopamine hit in their brains. As opposed to when I was a kid, we would go outside and we would run around on a hot day. But then when it got too hot, we'd sit under a tree and we'd look up at the clouds and we go, wow, that cloud looks like a duck. No, that one looks like a bear to me. And we would tell each other stories and we would make up games and we would get into stuff that wasn't purpose built toys, but were boxes and sticks. And we would count leaves on the tree. We would look at flowers. We'd watch snakes in the grass. Now, I know it's very different if you happen to have a saltwater crocodile in your backyard vis-a-vis what we have in the Northeast. But how many times, and this is why I think the Duke of Edinburgh program, is it Edinburgh or Edinburgh? I think it's Edinburgh. My apologies to the Duke. The program says go out, go on an adventure, go with friends, go walk. Sir Tony Robinson has done some amazing BBC videos on walking through history. But it's the idea of adventuring out. And you adventure out to explore and you adventure out to entertain yourself by using your imagination. And it is not compliance, it is not conformity, it is creativity. I want children to look at a pile of rocks and throw them, not at people or things, but to feel the weight, to see how they skip across water or they sink. And then I want them to look at the rocks and go, why is this so smooth? And why is this one so flaky? And why does this one look the way it does? I want them to look through the pile and go, ooh, that's a fossil. I want them to look at a tree and go, wow, I'm going to climb that. And then when they get up a certain way, they're going to go, the view is really different up here, but I'm not afraid I'm going to go higher. Adventure and intuition is the birth of independence. When children are protected and not allowed to experience the world, it creates dullness. It creates blandness. We need more joie de vivre in the world.
What do you think is the reason why we lost this opportunity, especially for the future generations? Why don't we keep exploring as we did in the forest and in nature? Why is there a sense of overprotection? Why is that? What do you think?
Well, it's fear based, right? And it's also legal based. So what has happened is over the last 40 years especially, lawyers have created this idea of in parentis loci, or the parent at the moment, and the idea that the accountability and responsibility is always on the adult. And so, therefore, the adult needs to be attending to and limiting the activities. Because the minute you get somebody's children or money, you open yourself to liability, to suing. You know, if a child is playing on a constructed physical playground and another child pushes them, then it becomes a legal civil matter, as opposed to, oh, we need to teach the kids how to play nice together, right? But also, if you go out in the wilderness and you are uncomfortable, or you go out and you explore, there's there's fear. Sub- Suburbs in the United States are very different than suburbs in the many European communities. So, suburbs in the United States are constructed for privacy and for protection. You have a fenced in backyard that your children play in so that you can keep an eye on them. Because anything of the front of the house or a communal playground without parental supervision is considered dangerous, because our country has been raised on the fear of kidnapping, on the fear of pain, on the fear of injury, on the fear of death. Fear, 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 fear. You are afraid, you are afraid, you are afraid, right? Whereas in cities in Europe, you have children who can enter mass public transportation to go to school by themselves. Here in the United States, parents don't even trust the school bus to take their children. They themselves drive the child to school, drop them off, go do some things, or they go to their work, and then they come back to pick their child up. There is no more children on the bus because, in a lot of parents' opinions, nobody's supervising my child on the bus. They'll hear words or they'll see things that I don't deem I want my child exposed to. But in reality, what's that doing is it is eliminating unstructured time. It is eliminating places where, yes, bad things can happen. I was bullied on the bus. I was bullied at lunch. I was bullied on the playground. But if we completely end adversity, and I do not support bullying in any way, shape, or form, we take away from our children their ability to learn how to self advocate and how to deal with people. And we are seeing that now in the adult world. We are seeing, especially in my country where people are actually relying on their parents to do everything for them, including intervene in their work. Could you imagine, as someone, getting a phone call from a parent about an employee who is over the age of 21? It is laughable. Yes, it is laughable, but it happens. These are not young 15, 16, 17, 18-year olds. These are 20 some year olds. Why? Because that is their only child. And they feel that as a parent, their job is to bulldoze every negative and every obstacle out of their children's lives. So instead of teaching them how to overcome, they are doing the hard work for them.
And
And
ultimately, as you say, right, we are depriving them from learning opportunities, right?
mhm,
And teaching opportunities.
that's right. And it's educational opportunities, because I don't know about you, but the last time I used exponents in math was 30 years ago. But I use almost daily map skills. I use almost daily interactions with people. I use self advocacy daily. I use information evaluation daily. Heck, as we figured out today, I'm needing to learn how to troubleshoot technology. But part of this is a phrase that I often say quietly when somebody asks me for information, or they ask me how to do something, or they ask for things. It's like, is Google broken in your home? To me, when I was young, I always curiously, with curiosity, wanted to find out the answer. Now I see a lot of people going, oh, well, they've lost the joie de vivre. They've lost the raison d'être. They've lost their reason for being. Humans.
What if what if we really lose, especially our children, we lose this ability of imagining a better and more fruitful world, especially in America, because I think it's a precedent. It's a really an incredible experiment. What happened really in the United States the past 300 years, I think, and it has to do a lot with really an imagination, really look beyond what is, and really strive for something much more life giving than currently.
Yeah. It means conformity. It means lack of invention. It means lack of idealism. It means that museums shouldn't exist, because why? Libraries shouldn't exist, because why? And we will almost become like the characters in the movie Wall-E, which I don't know if you've seen it, but it tells a post apocalyptic story of humans who had to flee to outer space because they destroyed the world based upon junking it for consumerism. And the movie describes how there is a single robot left that day in and day out does its function, which is to clean up. in outer space, the humans are in recliners, constantly drinking a nutrition shake, and they've ballooned up. They're out of shape. They just exist. Or we have The Matrix, where the idea of that movie was an alien force imposed on humanity. The fact that humans would become batteries in their machine. When in reality, what I see is a return to the industrialization days before unions. And I have to tell you, I am in awe of the unions in France and Italy and Germany. I mean, I love the fact that in France, they were trying to raise the retirement age for a group of people. And the farmers came in and they decided that that was a really, really disgusting proposal. And to demonstrate how much of a feces level proposal it was, they hosed down Parliament with their manure. That to me is insane because in the United States, people are losing the right to even protest. They're getting arrested in the streets for not having a permit to protest. Why? Because we don't have imagination. We don't have inspiration. We don't have. We are giving all that up so that we can quote unquote feel safe. But it's manufactured, right? It's manufactured. Do I feel safe? I happen to live in a liberal state in the United States, the state of New York. It's not the city, it's upstate. So there's a lot of farms and things up here. But in political speech and ideology, your liberal left wing parties would look at our liberal left wing parties and go, y'all are centrists. Because what has happened is the vision, the idea, the belief that all people are created equal, all people have the right to freedom of speech, religion, freedom from hunger. We have looked at the fourth freedom that our president FDR said, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and said in his famous Four Freedoms speech, which is the freedom from fear. And that has become the be all and end all. And parents are afraid, and in the way that they are creating their children's existence, they're taking their fears and they're saying to the child, you cannot have the experiences I did because I am afraid for you. Whereas the child does not know what it was like to fall off a four-wheeler when they were out in the woods, like my brother did, or to trip when you're on a hike and have to take care of yourself by bandaging your ankle and getting some sticks to go back to the beginning. Parents in the United States are consistently checking in with their child. They have location devices that will tell them exactly where their child is. It is the surveillance state. And I know a lot of people would argue that we need to be safe and we want safety, which I get. I do not commit crimes. I understand that there are a lot of people who believe that the only way we can prevent crime from happening is constant surveillance. But we have, just like in the movie The Truman Show, we have created a society where from the minute the parents find out they're going to have a baby, the sonogram goes live online and pictures are constantly shared and biometric data is constantly shared. And all of this sharing is such that we ensure that as long as we cocoon our children and we surveil them, that our fear of them coming to harm will not happen. But we have also begun to say your fear of your child's failure is limiting them learning and growth opportunities. We must allow failure that is growth.
I think this is beautiful. And what you're also really saying is that at the very, very bottom, we really agree on the necessity of all these things that we really disagree, but we disagree not so much about the the basics, but how we go about it, right? And I think we all want security, but there's only so much we can, and therefore it's a question of how we ultimately go about all these things, right? And that's always very hard. On a more positive note, I want to ask you the second last question. That's really what makes you hopeful when you look at your personal practice, what you experience with teachers, with administrators, and so on and so forth.
What makes me hopeful is how curious children are and how curious professionally there are teachers, educators, folks out there. Because a child is naturally curious. If they see a butterfly, they're just enthralled. If they see a fish, they want to know why and how. The more we get out of their way and the more we allow them to learn, standards become a tripping hazard as opposed to a bumping your head hazard, right? We want to teach our children to be the best scientists in the world. And all 290 some countries want to do that too. We want to teach our children to be engaged in the question of how and why. It takes intellectual curiosity to do that. And 4-year-olds have it in unlimited opportunity to do it. But then we say you must conform. I say, let them not conform. Let them be curious. And if we model cognitive curiosity as an adult, right? My phone tells me how much I use the different apps on it. And it says I'm on games and I do Facebook and I do social media. But it also says I use Wikipedia quite a bit. And I use Google Scholar quite a bit. Because I see something, I hear something, and I want to know more about it. I want to know why Frank L. Baum wrote The Wizard of Oz in upstate New York. I want to know why the Haudenosaunee, specifically the Oneida, welcomed the Tuscarora from North Carolina when they were moved out. I want to know why there are islands throughout the French internal departments, such as Tahiti. And I want to know how the Scottish came up with haggis. And I mean, I am Polish. There are kielbasa or Polish sausage in my ancestry. And I am Irish. And there was bangers and mash and bobble and squeak. So I get it. When you don't got a lot, you make it work. But I'm curious. I see people with curiosity. I met some of the most curious people in the world. But I want us as a society internationally to say to the curious, you are needed, you are valued, and we are going to support you. You may not have a wealthy life, but you will have a comfortable existence because I believe and we believe that all of your deep, deep, deep curiosity from when you were a 5-year old and you took baking soda and you put white vinegar on top of it and the volcano exploded. I want you to ask why, and I want you to go, it doesn't matter. And when you reach out to grab a cup of coffee or tea, in your absent mindedness because you're so focused in on finding out, you won't have to go, oh, I have to go buy myself coffee. It will be there. Because even the people who are most challenged in their existence will find work that is fulfilling. And there are some places where people who are afflicted with Down syndrome, their job is to go around and make sure people have coffee or tea or croissants. And they feel like they're doing something that is worthwhile because without the coffee, the tea, or the croissant that these young men or women with Down syndrome brings, then their scientists, and yes, that's what they call them, their scientists, will not find a cure or will not fly to the moon because they know that even though they are not doing the calculations, but they are bringing help to discover the cure, go to the moon. And that is a life well lived.
Beautiful. Last question. What makes you truly feel alive?
Oh, oh my gosh. There are so many things, from the breeze to the sound of a quiet lake to a bird chirping to the laughter of my niece to the chuckle of my nephew to the smile on the faces of people. There is just so much. And I often find and fight my negativity, and I often fight and find my depression. But what I realize is I believe in people. And I believe in their ultimate ability to overcome and to become their best. They are not okay. They're outstanding. And that's why I adopted it as my motto to move you from okay to outstanding.
Dr. Casey Jakubowski, thank you so much really for your time and for being truly a gift to me and really to the world.
Thank you. This has been an honor and a privilege.
Dr. Casey Jakubowski. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com. Mentor